Let's talk about the SharePoint API for Power Automate. So a couple months ago, I made an intro to API videos. You guys really loved it, or at least you told me you did. And you said you wanted more API content. So what I thought we would do today is look at some of those things that you can do via the SharePoint API using a Power Automate flow that you can't do with the built-in action. So we're going to talk about creating a site, we're going to then create a list, we're going to add a column to that list, and then we're even going to create a view. And along the way, we're going to learn some like troubleshooting building steps. So we're going to talk about Terminate, how that helps us. And I'm probably going to throw a little AI in there just to kind of show you how, like when we're trying to do something we don't know how to do, like working with this new API, what works best there. Sound like fun? Then let's just switch over to my desktop and take a look. All right, so here we are at make.powerautomate.com, and we're going to just create ourselves a new flow, right? So create, and we're going to do a instant cloud flow. And so one of the things you always want to remember when you're learning something new, it's typically not about the trigger, it's about learning the actions. So in those cases, I'm always just going to use a manually triggered flow. So that way I can just trigger it as fast as I can. Once I understand how the new actions work, then I'll incorporate them, worry about the triggers and all that. Okay, so we'll call this SharePoint API for Power Automate, and then we'll say create. After a second, it loads us into the new studio, and we can just now run this flow at a whim. Okay, so in order to use the SharePoint API, what you're going to do is you're going to hit the plus here, and you're going to say add an action, and then we're going to search for SharePoint HTTP. Now you've probably seen this before, right? Send an HTTP request to SharePoint. So this action lets us use the API. The great thing about this action is that A, it's still a standard flow, so it doesn't make it premium, whereas if we use like a regular HTTP connector, it would be premium. B, it handles authentication. So that when you see things about like, make sure you get your tokens right and all that, meh, Power Automate's going to do that for us, right? So one less thing for us to fight with when it comes to an API. Now, so we've got this ready to go, and so we want to create a SharePoint site. So the first thing I will typically do in this type of scenario is jump over to one of my search engines and say create SharePoint site API, something like that. Now you'll see that there's a video, yes, a few years ago, when was that, 2021, I made a video showing this same concept, but this time we're going to do it again, a little more focused on the new UI, but you can always watch the old one. Anyway, you start to get a whole bunch of stuff at you. Now, when you're doing this API stuff, if the first thing you look for, if you're right here, like, look, on Microsoft Learn, create modern SharePoint site using REST. That's exactly what I want to do. Typically speaking, I'm going to try to go here, right? Like if it doesn't come, then we can start talking about, we'll see in a minute, like using the API or using the AI, artificial intelligence like ChatGPT, or starting to look at blogs and other types of resources. But typically, if I can get this information straight from Microsoft, that's where we're going to have the most luck. One of the reasons for that, right? You're thinking, why? So think about SharePoint. SharePoint's been around since like 2001. I don't know if you can do the math. I can't, but that was a long, long time ago. And so there is millions of things out there about creating SharePoint sites on all the different versions for the last 20 something years. So sometimes you'll find that AI gives you, if you ask generically, like how do I create a SharePoint site? It'll give you half rights. And it's not that it's wrong, but it might be showing you how to create one for SharePoint 2003, which you don't actually care. And it doesn't really tell you, it just says SharePoint. So that's why I'm trying to find stuff in Microsoft's documentation in these scenarios. Anyway, so if we scroll down here a little bit, you're going to see it's like, hey, create a modern site. And it's like, cool, if you want to do that, you need to do this stuff. This is what I wanted, okay? Because now if we've got something that's in front of us, if we go back over here to our flow, we can see that, look, it's like, hey, well, what is the site address? Okay, so we're going to create one. So we just need any SharePoint site. So typically here, I'm going to choose the default. Then it's like, well, what method do you want to use? I don't know, let's go back to the documentation. Let's put this next teacher so I don't mess up. It says method post. What is a post, right? We've talked about this before. Post means I'm going to push information. I'm going to hand information up to the server, right? We're going to hand it what we want created. So we're going to change this to post, right? We don't have to worry about them. We got it. For the URI, we go here. It says, hey, use this crazy thing, right? So I'm going to copy this. Now, whether or not you get that front slash, it typically doesn't matter. But for me, like when I look at the suggestion notes, they don't have the slash there. So I always try to paste it in the way that the example shows. So we'll paste that in. It looks like it's going to hit the API, SP Site Manager, create. That sounds right. And remember, they use pretty plain Englishy words for this stuff. So like if you posted that in and it said, you know, SP List Manager, you'd be like, I bet that's not going to create a site, right? So you're trying to kind of spot check it along the way, but that makes sense. Okay. So go back over here. What else does it want? It says, hey, they're going to want all this header stuff. Okay. Now, when we go to do this header stuff, I'm going to need to copy the different pieces, right? So I'm going to grab this accept. I'm going to hit Control C. I'm going to grab this part, Control C, this part, Control C. Okay, I copied all of them. Now you notice I did a bunch of Control C's, but Shane, didn't you lose your stuff? No, right? So we go over here, we'll say show all. It says for headers, put my cursor here, I'm gonna hit Windows V. Hopefully you knew there was a clipboard history because it's the awesomest thing ever. And I'll go down here and find, all right, so there was the accept. And then over here, Windows V. And so then application, JSON, blah, blah, blah. Like, who cares, right? Whatever it said needs to go there, I'm gonna put it there. Same thing, Windows V. So it looks like now we had a OData version and then Windows V 4.0. This is why it was important that I copied and pasted them kind of in the right order. Method, and then post. And it's not the order that these are in, but I got to make sure that OData is on the left and 4 is on the right? Method, post, right? So it looks the same as here. So where you see this colon, that's kind of how you know the two different sides. What you can also do is now I've got that in there. If you click this little button, it'll switch to text mode. And that looks a little bit more written like what was over there. So I can kind of spot check, does this make sense? Does that look what I expect? But you can't just directly copy and paste in there because I got out all the quotes. So it's easier not to use this usually. But now that we've got it, I guess a good way to spot check if you're, once again, just struggling with what's going on. Okay, so then we got the body. So we go down here to the body. And in the body, right, it says, hey, for the body, it needs all of this. Now, if you watch my video on JSON, you understand that that is JSON. If you didn't, there's a link up there. But so look, we know that the curly on the outside, that means it's a record. In that record, the first field is request, and then the request field is got the curlies around it, so it's a record as well. Doesn't really matter, but once again, learning JSON is just very helpful because the more comfortable you are with what you see there, the easier it is to troubleshoot it and update it. Now, clearly we can't just copy and paste their stuff, so we're now going to kind of read through this line by line and just be like, all right, so it wants a request, title, communication site 1. Well, we're going to change this to my flow site, right? Make sure the double quotes don't get lost. For the URL, so that's the URL you want to create it at. So obviously for me, it is not Contoso, it is Shane's Cows. And then sites, com site 1, we're going to just change this to flow 1. So, I don't have any conflicts, okay? LCID. So from years of doing this, I know that that is my language code. That is US English. So if you wanted the site to be created in another language, you would need to go find what is your LCID. So maybe in a second we look at it, like set it in ChatGPT or ask it what you'd want to do. But for me, 1033 is correct. Share by enabled false. Sure, who cares, right? Classification, low business impact. All right. Sensitivity label. So see how it's in the curly or the arrow brackets? So it's saying, hey, you got to put your ID in here. I don't have one of those. We don't do that here. I don't know what it even is. So I'm just going to delete it. And once again, like I'm going to delete it. And if it doesn't work, then I'll try to worry about it later. But don't overthink this stuff. Just, what's it going to do? Not work? Who cares? Description. How about something like we did it with Flow? Web template, site publishing, blah, blah, 0. I don't know. So if we go back over here, it would tell me that, look, there's a communication site, site page publishing 0, non-group associated team site would be STS3. So it's helping me with it in the documentation. Once again, in a minute, we're going to look at how you might use AI if you wanted to find other types of sites, but there's the two most common right in front of my face. So we're just going to leave it site publishing 0. Okay, site design ID 64 blah, 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 back over here. And if we look a little bit, if we scroll down here, it's like, hey, 64 blah, 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 that's a showcase site. If you left that null or provide this squid, it would be a topic, blank would be this one. So it's just saying, hey, put the different piece in there depending on what you want, right? So if we want to change it to a topic site, who cares, right? We can just copy this out. And then we would just go in here and change this to this, right? Make sure you don't lose your double quotes. That's a big problem people have. Owner, well, it is not that, right? The owner is going to be me, so let's fix that real quick, right? So that's my Shane at powerapps901.com. And then web template extension ID, we look over here again, it talks about how those work. If you had your own to do, I don't have one, so we're just going to leave that at 000. Okay, so there you go. So this should make a site. It cites flow 1, right? I'm going to copy this before I leave. Looks good. Then let's just hit save, and then let's hit test. Got to manually test it. We've never done it before, right? So we're going to click test down here underneath my face. This is going to check my authentication. Remember, it handles it all, but I got to consent to using my authentication. So that looks good. We'll click continue under my face, run the flow under my face, and then done under my face. Geez, old Pete, it's a lot of clicking. But look at that. A few seconds later, the flow was ran successfully. Now, save yourself pain and suffering. Go down here and look at the body, right? So this is the body output. And so if you see your URL here, then that tells you it created. Because what will happen sometimes you give it bad things, right? Like it will not, the flow will run successfully, but the response down here will be different. So, but when I see my URL here, that is a great sign that if I go here and paste it in, ta-da, we created a SharePoint site. Yay, yes, right? Good job, us. Hey, if you're enjoying this type of stuff, remember, I've got plenty of training classes over at training.powerapps911.com. We've got 201 for those, entry level to mid people. 401, we're getting to advanced API stuff, going way deeper down the rabbit hole than what you're seeing here, getting custom connectors, all that stuff. Or Power Platform University, which is an immersive 6-month experience. So definitely go check all those out. So there's the first piece. Now, all right, we're not done though. We want to have more fun with this. So let's go back over to our flow and let's edit our flow. Now, when we go to edit our flow, right now, what we want to do is we want to create a list, okay? So I'm probably gonna do the same thing over here, right? Go to my search engine and type in SharePoint API create list. Let's see what we get there. Okay, same thing, look. So this one immediately returns Microsoft Learn at the top. So I'm going to ignore all the other stuff because that's where I want to start. I know that's going to probably be the most correct. We can span out the other stuff later, but right now we're going to jump to there. We could read all this. We're not going to. But what we're looking for is, how about something like this? The following example shows how to create a list. And look, post. Okay, so we know that post thing we got to do. And then the site. And then there's the webs.list, right? So we know that the pieces are here. There's a body. So let's kind of do the same deal again. Okay, now what we're going to do this time, right? Go down here. First, I'm going to take this one and I'm going to rename this to make my life easier, right? We're going to call this create SharePoint site. Okay. Now we're going to hit the plus again, add an action. We'll search for SharePoint HTTP again. There, send an HTTP request to SharePoint. Okay. So now it says, hey, well, what site address do you want to do this at? Now, when we did the create a site, it didn't matter because we were creating a new site. So any SharePoint site we had access to was going to work. For this one, we want to create it in that new site. So we're going to have to put that here. Now, if you've got it available, right, we can go in here and I believe, oh, nope, it's not going to show up, right? It hasn't refreshed the list. No big deal. We're going to say enter a custom value and we're going to paste that URL in. Okay. So, because that's where we want to create it. So make sure you're doing that part right. Now, also here, when we go to the method, right, we saw that that needs to be a post. And then if we go back, so then, okay, so we got that API web list, right? Once again, in English, that sounds about right. So we're going to think that that's probably a good thing to do. And then back over here. Okay, so authorization, we don't care, right? Because Flow is going to do that for us. So we got that whole accept and this stuff. Now be careful with this, right? I wrote the syntax a little bit differently. This is where understanding a little JSON helps you. So yes, we want accept again. This time we want this for the thing, right? So it's slightly different. So be cautious about that. I've messed that up before, assuming that all the accept, application JSON stuff was the same. And if you get it wrong, then sometimes your flow won't run. You like pull your hair out and it's because you pasted the wrong thing. So just recopy all that, right? So we'll copy that one. We'll copy that, right? Same thing. This is exactly the same, but I'm going to recopy it all again, just to avoid any mistakes. Now, content length, and you see how it's in brackets, right? So it's saying it's a record. I'm going to ignore that. X request digest, same thing. It's in brackets. I'm going to ignore curlies, whatever. We're going to ignore those, okay? So that's right. So the same way we ignore authorization, we're going to ignore those two as well. If it doesn't work, we could always come back and try again, but we're going to hope that that's okay. All right? So we're going to say show all. For our headers, Windows V, content type, application JSON, Windows V. Oh, that is wrong. Control Z, Control Z. Windows V. This one was, I don't know. I screwed up. All right. Let's just go double check again, right? Content type, application JSON, right? Accept. I didn't copy accept. All right. So copy that. All right. Sometimes you go too fast. Paste. But don't just be like, oh, I'm going to let it run because then you're confused. So just make sure that looks right when it's all said and done. That looks good to me. For the body, same deal. We're going to copy this over there and we're going to paste it in. Okay, so now this one, all right, so metadata type SP list, allow content types true, base template's 100, my list description title is, let's leave it test, right? Doesn't care. Now, the first thing I'm going to ask myself though is what type of list is this creating? Okay, So this is one of those things where, right, this whole base template, let's copy this. This is one of those places I found that my friend ChatGPT really helps, right? Because now I'm going to ask a very, very specific question. So we go over here, I'm going to show you a conversation I had. So look, when creating a list using the API, what are the different values for base template? And so then it kind of explains it. And then it says, oh, look, 100 is a generic list. 101 is a document library. Survey is 102. Like, this is the stuff I've always struggled to find when Googling or Binging, whatever, right? Like, I have a hard time, but I found that ChatGPT does great when I'm like, hey, this very specific piece, tell me what it does. And then now it can break it out. So if whatever type of list we want to create. So it turns out a generic list is what we want. But this is one of those places where I found AI was better than, like, if I go over here and we tried something like SharePoint API create lists base template types, right? Like if we try this, then I got to kind of start reading this, and it's like list template type enumeration. And so this actually says the same thing that did, but I had to be not afraid, like, and understand like a list template type enumerate. I don't know. This just feels yuckier to me, but in reality, this would work as well. Or I might find myself at this point starting to do, but you can see that Copilot here is also doing like ChatGPT did, and it's just breaking that down for me. And I think that's a lot easier way to go. Okay. So this will create our list. Let's go ahead and rename this one to create list, create SharePoint list with API, whatever, right? I was tempted to break this, but I'm not going to make the mistake. I'm just going to tell you what ahead of time. Okay. So when you're building this, now what's going to happen if we do a test right now, right? And we'll go ahead and hit save when we're talking about this. So if we did this, that first step's going to fail, right? Why? Because that site already is created, right? That flow 1 site is already there. So our flow would fail. So what you want to do here is you don't want to run this particular action. So the way that I do this when I'm kind of building and stepping through this process, right? Because I needed it created so we could learn how to do that before we learn how to do this. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to add another action real quick. We're going to use the terminate action. Right? So there's terminate, and we're going to say status succeeded. So all this does is in the flow. Because now what I can do is take this create SharePoint site, because we don't want to run this right now, right? We're just going to put this away for later. We'll just drag it down here like so. And so now what's going to happen, right? When we run the flow, let's hit save. When we run the flow, it's just going to create the SharePoint list, and then it's going to end it, and it's not going to run this. So this is one of those tricks, like when I'm trying to learn something sequential like this, don't just build and do. I want you to iterate, but you can't completely iterate because you'd have to then give it a different URL for every one of these, which would be a different URL for this. So now, like, we know this one works, let's just put it off to the side for the moment. So now let's hit test. And then here we'll just do automatically, so it'll be a little less clicking this time. And now we're going to say test down here in my face. It failed. All right. So this happens. Also happens, notice that sometimes when the new test tool fails or even successful, sometimes it doesn't finish loading. If this happens, all right, we just need to go out. We'll click on our failed run. And so the property metadata does not exist on the type SharePoint list. Make sure to only use property names that are defined by the type. And notice it threw us back in the old interface. So our action failed. It wasn't happy. Let's hit edit. Whether or not it puts us in the new studio, puts it back in this new studio. Flow, right? Keeps us guessing. Okay. So when this happens to me, the first thing I always try is, you see here, like how we did this one as accept application JSON semicolon OData verbose. And this one we just did JSON. And to be fair, like that's what they told me to do over here. Okay. They're wrong. I told you to use the Microsoft documentation because they're the least likely to be wrong. I didn't say we're never wrong. But if we just copy this same one, so Control A, Control C, Control A, Control V, put that same one in there. This is always the first thing I try when I get that weird metadata error, right? So we're going to say save, and now we'll click on test. All right, click all these. Oh, look, and now our flow is successful. And because I talked bad about flow now, it's not going to update again. So we'd have to jump out and in, right? We're not going to. But if we go over here, our site contents, look, and we do a refresh, look, there's our test list. Yay! Okay, so one of the things to keep in mind, right? Like when you're doing this, once again, the Microsoft documentation is where we start. If it has problems, we have to kind of pivot from there. If we need help, now that we know the specific action where we're digging into, I'm going to switch over and use AI for that. But this little update typically gets it, right? Okay, so there you go. So now we have created a site, and we've created a list. So let's pull this one down here as well. Okay, so now the third thing we want to do is create a column, right? So to create a column, we're going to do, once again, add action. We're going to search for SharePoint API or HTTP. There's our send a request. Okay, so we want that same site. Now that we've been in and out a couple of times, our flow site might show up here. All right, it's still not ready to show up. So we'll say enter custom value, Windows V, and we'll scroll down a little bit. There's our URL. Now, for this one, we're going to have to do even a little bit more work, okay? So we're going to stick with our thing, though. We're going to go here, and we're going to say SharePoint API, add column to list, right? And so the fact that it's an auto-suggest is even better. So, oh, look, there's another document for me. Oh, what was that? 2021 as well. Well, you know. But look, down here, working with the list and list items with REST. So if we jump here, and so like lots of scary stuff, but what we're really looking for here, so we did create a list. This is the same one we did earlier. But if we keep going down here, how to update a list, how to create a custom field for a list, that sounds like our jam, right? So we're going to try to do the same thing. Now, this time though, we're going to pivot further away from what they're doing as well, right? So I'm going to copy this, right? We'll go here. So we know we're going to do a post. We're going to paste this in. Now, if you look, API web, right? So hit the web API, get the list, and then get the list by its GUID, okay? So we could do that, right? If we went over here to our SharePoint site, and then I think if we go to list settings, right? This with a little bit of encoding around, so I think we'd start here to here. That is the list GUID, right? So that would work. I could do that method, but what I'm typically going to do, because that doesn't make any sense to me, right? So we named this list test. So when most of these actions, and this is just stuff you'll learn over time, but most of these actions have a way to, get list by title, right? So I think if I jump over here to my friend ChatGPT, okay, so here, right, when working with the SharePoint REST API, how can I get a list by title so I can create a column? Now, I asked it this, and so it's like, hey, here's the steps. And so what I notice here is API web list, right? We're there thus far, get by title. So this is actually the answer to the question I was asking, right? So we're gonna be able to use this right here to get the list by title. Now, what's interesting is if you go down one more step, it says, hey, to create a column in a list, web list get by title fields. So it was actually going to answer the whole problem we were trying to solve. So we're going to still use the Microsoft documentation, but notice ChatGPT kind of helped me here. So if we go here, right, so we're going to replace this whole list portion with get by title. And then here for the list title, inside of single quotes, we're going to say test. So what this is saying is, hey, go to flow 1, get the list by title, and then get the field. And if you post to the field, so if you did a get here, it would return all the columns already in the list. By posting, we're saying add a column. And to do that, we need, well, first got to do our headers, right? So we got this authorization we skipped, accept. Now, content type, we're not going to fall for that trip again. We're going to basically do this. We're going to grab accept. We're going to grab content type. And we're going to grab this one, which we know seems to work. Copy, we don't need any of this other stuff, okay? So back over here, and then we'll say show all again, and then we can do our little paste here, and we'll paste it again, and then Windows V for accept, and then Windows V for content type, okay? So there you go. So that gets those pieces in place. I could have copied them from the other one. If I was going to copy them from the other one, I would have went here. I would have went to this mode, said Control A, Control C, go back to here, right? Not have any of this, do this, and then paste that in, right? So that's how I could have just copied those, but it's probably easier to put them in by hand. So that way I'm not making any assumptions or going too fast. Then the body, of course, we're going to look for, what are we looking for here? It's not how to create a list. It was how to create a custom field right here. And so we're going to copy out the body. And so now in the body, we're going to paste this in. Okay, so what does this say? This is going to create a SharePoint field. Title is currently called field title. Let's just call it my number. My number, field type kind, it says you need a field type value. This is once again where ChatGPT just does a great job. I asked for it, and right here it's like, hey, look, field type kind 1 is an integer. Field type 2 is text, no. So all the different field types. So we just said we want to do an integer, so that's 1. So we would just go here and we would delete all of this and just put in the number 1. Remember, when you learn JSON, since it's a number, it doesn't need to be in quotes. So then here we have required. Do we want to be a required field? I do not. So I'll just put in false. Enforce unique values, right? We'll change that to false as well. Static name. This is that root name that auto gets generated for you. If you wanted to set that yourself, and we probably do, I don't want it to be field name for sure. I'm going to also make it my number. But that way, right, if you were creating it, like if you wanted this one to have a space in it, remember, title is the one that they see, everyone sees. Static name, the one underneath the hood, the one that can't be changed later, right? Title can be changed at any point. This one doesn't. You want to make sure this one gets created without a space. Okay? So let's rename this action here to add a number column. Let's hit save. All right, let's hit test. Click all this stuff again, and then click test under my face. Cross my fingers, and it said flow run failed. That's very rude. All right, well, let's figure out if we can figure out why. So right, it didn't load flow. We'll go here, we'll click on this one. This will always load. Cannot find the resource for the request get by title. Interesting. So let's see, did I not update that right? API web get by title test. Isn't that what we named our list? You know what I did? So look, API web get by title fields, right? What's missing there? Remember, this is where we're reading those in English, getting used to the English, right? List is not there. And if we were to go check like over in ChatGPT, look, API web list. So this is where I didn't take my own advice, but by taking my advice on troubleshooting, I was able to see the error in my ways. So hopefully all we need to do is go back over here. I'm guessing when I was editing all this stuff, I knocked that out somehow. Put our cursor here. And so list, get by title, right? So now API web, that seems a little bit better. So let's hit save again. Let's do all the test games again. Yeah. All right, we'll click on all this stuff and then we'll say test. Hey, our flow ran successfully. Now, if we go over here, go back to test, we have title. I don't see my column, boo, right? But if you go to list settings, my number is here. So it worked, but it didn't add it to the view. So now, right, next thing we gotta do is we wanna figure out how to add that to the view. So same deal again, right? We're gonna edit. We're gonna grab this particular action. Oh, minimize this. Grab this, drag this down here. We'll add another one of these, add an action, and SharePoint HTTP. I misspelled it, but it still figured it out. All right, our same site again. Oh, there's my flow site. Now, so then once again, you know what? Let's just jump straight to it. Let's just go ask my friend ChatGPT. Using the REST API, how do I add a field to the default view? And if we scroll down here, it's like, hey, you need to get the default view ID. I don't. What we can do is API list get by title, right? So we've done all that. Views. And so then it looks like it wants us to do view ID and then view fields. So once again, I bet that by views, I bet instead of this whole view ID, I bet that we can do get view by title. So let's try that. Okay, so back over here, so let's do this. So we're gonna do a post, our URL, so we're gonna paste this in, right? So API list get by title test, right? We know that's right. Views get by title, all items, right? Because that is the name of the default view. View fields, add view field, and then we didn't call that mine, we called it my number, right? Once you understand the pattern, even though whatever you're looking for doesn't suggest it necessarily, you start to get the idea, right? And then now we can hopefully see that this should do what we want to do. And if we think that that'll get it, and once again, we can try. If it doesn't work, great, who doesn't care? Then, you know, it talks about the headers again. So we'll do our same headers we've been doing. And then we need the body here, right? Oh no, we don't need a body, right? Because this one doesn't have a body. Why doesn't this one have a body? Because we don't need to set anything else. Like we're doing it in, once again, reading the URL. We're just saying view fields, add view field, and then the name of our column, right? Or the field. So we don't need any of that. We do probably need our headers. So we're just going to paste in those same headers again. Control V. We're just going to assume that these headers are the right thing, whether it tells us to do them or not, until proven otherwise. Okay, so we got our same stuff. We've kind of crafted our own URL here by guessing that get by title was a way to go. And so we'll say save, and then we'll say test. I hope you guys appreciate how much time I save by cutting out all this waiting that I do for saving these things and testing these things. But now it's done, we can click on all these buttons and we'll click test. Fingers crossed that it works. Hey, our flow ran successfully. And so to prove it, over here, test, and we'll do a refresh on this page. Oh, look, there's title and there's my number. We did it, we did it. Now, a couple of other things to think about, right? So if we wanted to continue this demo and add an item via the HTTP, we definitely could, but why, right? I'm lazy. We know that if we edit the flow, if we wanted to create an item, right, an action, if we do SharePoint create, there's a built-in create item. So yes, you could do it with the HTTP, but why, right? Like, I mean, there are sometimes reasons, but most of the time there's not. So use the actions that are there. So you need to be familiar with them. There's like 40 of them. But, you know, so this is kind of just a good intro of, you know, how to do this, how to work through it. It's not a perfect science. I've been doing it for 20 plus years and you saw me struggle and screw up and guess it's okay. That's why we start with a test site, right? And we can just mess and mess and mess. And if it gets too bad, delete the site, create a new test site, try again. That's how you're going to learn this API. But, you know, we use it for stuff like this. I've had videos before on like, setting like the secure, like hiding a list, like changing some of the metadata properties. So that links up there. We've also done ones where we've done things like get all the group members, right? So there's no SharePoint actions for get group members. So if you want to get SharePoint group members, there's a video up there for that. There's a lot of this stuff. Also, now that you've seen how it works, and right, we've been doing this with this manual trigger over and over again. But keep in mind, we could change the trigger, right? So we could have a power app. We can make a power app where people enter stuff, and they press the button, boop, and then it creates a SharePoint site and creates the list, creates the columns, all that, right? Like, we can do whatever we want now that we know how the actions work. So don't discount all the interesting ways you can use this API. And don't discount this is a pretty safe API for you guys to explore because you just spin up a SharePoint site, you try all the nasty things you read on the internet against that site, and if things go bad, you just kind of close your eyes and you delete the site. It's like you never did it, okay? So try things, it's all right. Man, I feel like there's one more thing I want to tell you guys, but I cannot think of it. I've said it for the last minute trying to, so I'm going to give up on that. But if we can do anything to help you in this, please reach out over at powerapps901.com. We can do consulting anywhere from a 30-minute quick engagement just to fix one little problem you're having, all the way up to some type of crazy, you know, multi-year project, all those fun things. We got the training classes. We can help you if you're having problems with Power Apps, Power Automate, SharePoint, AI, you know all the things, right? Power BI, all of those, right? And with that, I'm going to say thanks and have a great day.